Welcome, Katerina.
Thank you so much.
Amazing. So, why don't we kick off? And if you could share with people watching and listening a little bit about yourself and your origin story.
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Katerina. I'm a senior student at Minerva University studying business operations and economics. And over the past 4 years, through my program, I've got to live in 6 countries. As a result of that, I also got to do a lot of incredible internships spanning from doing supply chain recruiting at Tesla, which really kind of where my spark for supply chain came from.
Wow.
And now at JP Morgan, more on the financial side of things, where I'll be continuing my post-grad plans.
Amazing. Tell me a little bit about the 6 countries where your travels have taken you, your learning has taken you.
Yeah, absolutely. So our first year was based in San Francisco, which is where I'm currently based to graduate. And then our second year, we went to Seoul, South Korea, followed by Berlin, Germany. And third year was Buenos Aires, Argentina. And my fourth year, I just wrapped up in East Asia. First, I was in Taipei, Taiwan, and then Tokyo, Japan. So kind of all over the place, bit of Asia and Europe.
It's interesting being able to move not only geographically, because with what's going on in the world with geopolitical risk and a lot of shifts in manufacturing and operating model, you're not only getting that, but it sounds like you're moving through different functions, finance, recruiting, a little bit of consulting. You mentioned Tesla and supply chain. What do you think has been like the biggest aha moment for you, just reflecting back on the past 4 years?
I think specifically when it comes to living in so many different countries, it teaches you to take a step back, put yourself in someone else's shoes, and just observe. I think anytime I go into a new country, I'm now moving there fully with my 2 suitcases. I kind of see what people are doing around me. If I'm walking into a grocery store for the first time, how am I checking out? Do I need to pull up a ton of cash or can I use a credit card? You just see how systems work incredibly differently in different countries. Like Tokyo, Japan was so different than Buenos Aires, for example. And it really does teach you to observe and learn from the people around you.
Yeah, that's incredible. And you're a business operations major, an
Yes.
economics major at Minerva University. Where is Minerva University?
So Minerva University is based in San Francisco, but then we partner with different universities and have small campuses in each of the cities.
Right, right. That's amazing. And then what drew you to those roles where you have this like overlap of people, strategy, data, all the things that you
Yeah,
that you mentioned?
great question. I think from high school, I always knew I wanted my work to be people oriented, but that's very broad. So I think going into Minerva, I was originally going to do finance and kind of continue with that. But I realized we had a managing operational complexity major, that's the official name of the major, where you learn about the different business systems, business operations. You still get to use Excel sheets, but see how a company actually, goes from the very first point A of, the customer order all the way to how it actually gets delivered. And I found it incredibly exciting to see how many different pieces, moving pieces, are within a business. And I'm like, I can learn finance on the side. Let me look at what operations truly looks like. And I think it's really from my first class I had, which was, I believe, business systems, where I really got to see how like businesses essentially go from the beginning to end. And I think that's where it all started. And then slowly I started looking for internships that were either supply chain or business oriented. And that really got my journey started.
Wonderful. And some of that journey we're going to talk about, including Tesla. And so
Yeah.
at Tesla, you mentioned that's where you learn the ropes of supply chain, so to speak, and supply chain recruiting, which is even
Yeah.
more difficult because you really have to understand the essence of what's required in a role in order to see that in another person and create the right environment for them to be successful. So, what did that role teach you about how companies identify really strong supply chain and engineering talent, and what were some of those like key criteria?
Absolutely. I think when it comes to recruiting, the first and foremost, most important step is what your resume looks like. Of course, everyone talks about that, but it really comes down to what keywords are on there that these students kind of put on there to make sure that they do stand out. Yeah, I think a few things we looked for first was, for example, the number of SKUs they worked with, if they worked on very large projects, because Tesla works with, millions of dollars. did they work on other projects that also they had to deal with great capacity? Because that shows not only are they able to scale something, but they also have experience with a lot of moving parts. You know, a very small startup might operate a bit differently than a larger company. So that was one aspect of it.
Can I tell you a story? I'll never forget when I was interviewing earlier in my career and about around SKUs. I had the same question. The volume of SKUs. And at the time, I think the company that I was working for, I mean, had a lot. At least, at least 100,000. And this guy, I said, so what is your experience managing SKUs? And he told me one. And it was literally moving a tank from like one location to another location. And I was listening to him and I was like, okay, so the only supply chain experience that you've had for 7 years was related to one SKU. And he was like, yeah, it was a tank. So a specific tank and making sure that it arrived on time from point A to point B, wherever those points may have been in the world. And I was like, this is going to blow him out of the water. When he understands the velocity and the volume and the changes and the new product introduction, you might not have had that at Tesla, but MPI was like 70% of the portfolio, which means you're churning new products and the setup and the rigor and like everything that goes into having that integrated and interoperable data in wholesale distribution, not only with the supplier, but with the retailer and with the customer. And like, that's really, really, really like high volume, fast moving. It's not one tank.
Yeah, no, we definitely hired for a lot of NPI. I mean, there's always new products coming. It was vital to make sure that these students or whoever we were hiring, they had either experience or they had that adaptability, I think, was a big one that kind of we tried to see through the resume as well.
Yeah. And if they didn't have experience, maybe a capstone, or tell me an example about where maybe that might have helped bridge the lack of internships or experience for early career professional.
Yeah, exactly. Great question. I do actually have one story. So when I was looking through the hundreds of resumes that are coming in, one that stood out to me, this person in particular didn't have a lot of, let's say, supply chain or engineering experience or internships in particular, but they did work on a senior capstone all year where they actually created their own business and led the full supply chain end to end. And that kind of passion and motivation honestly kind of led him to the next step, because I saw that, yes, you don't have formal experience, but you do have that adaptability, that grit, that motivation to start something new and actually, get it deployed or get it out there in front of customers. And I thought that was a very unique way to showcase his skills and also got him forward to the next round. So understanding that if you don't have that right experience, you can still create something on your own and put yourself out there to make yourself noticed and stand out.
Thank you for sharing your experience with Tesla. And now let's pivot to financial services, because capital markets is highly regulated. I'm sure that your JPMC experience and how you think about business and finance and operational decision making is wildly different with that open aperture and bringing in all of your FS experience as an analyst. And so tell us a little bit about how that's maybe changed or enhanced your understanding of business operations after Tesla.
Yeah, absolutely. I have so many insights on this, especially because Tesla came right before JPMC. And I think what really stood out to me was how different the systems work. At Tesla, kind of the motto they went by was the best system is no system, which means if you saw a problem, you kind of go in there and fix it right away. But if you try to do that JPMC, that would not go very well. Usually, if you're trying to make a decision, any kind of decision takes months or even years to really get through. I even had asked my manager once about why a client was getting onboarded for such a long period of time, and little did I realize how many regulations go into just onboarding such a big client, making sure that the product we are providing is customized to them because of how many different functions they have. So it really shows how complex the operations are, and then layer that level of regulations and laws and how the economy is changing. It just changes so much nuance into how specific you have to be when making decisions and really make sure you have that attention to detail so nothing goes wrong. You don't make any huge mistakes or errors.
Absolutely. And you know what's interesting? The local context matters. It matters in financial services. And then also, there are varying regulations across the world. We know that now in supply chain, especially when it comes to ESG related disclosure, compliance. Depending on where you sit, you might have EUDR or you might have CBAM or EPR, all these acronyms. But then in the US, when it comes to EPR or across several countries. And so you mentioned when we opened that you kind of take a neighborhood walk and figure out like, how do I pay for things? Like, where do I go to get this or that? How has that shaped your experience or taught you to think differently about work culture?
That's a really great question. I think also because I got to work in some of the different countries as well, it really taught me kind of how different cultures are. I think most recently I was in Japan, and Japan's an incredible place to visit, but their work culture is very intense. You can kind of see how they're working very long hours. It is very intense. It is very kind of regulation heavy, rules following, things like that. While, let's say, like in California, when I was at Tesla, it felt a bit more kind of calm, chill. Things were there was less hierarchy, let's say. So like I could reach out to my manager's manager and have a coffee chat with them, while in a different culture that might not be as appropriate. So I think what that really had me bring to the work culture, like now that I'm going into JPMC, is, understanding what are the nuances in not just the company, but in your team specifically. I think teams operate very different.
And so you've shared all of this great experience, your different internships, tips and tricks for a great resume. What experience, insights can you share with people watching right now who want this, who want global exposure and opportunity, who want to know like what can they do right now from wherever they are in their academic career to land that next best internship?
Yeah, great question. I think in multiple ways. First, if you're looking for global exposure, I've heard studying abroad changes people's perspective so much. So if there is an opportunity to not just study abroad, but go work a local internship in a different country, or even do a local project, understand what the culture looks like, that's going to change your perspective so much. And from an internship perspective, don't be afraid to reach out. Especially freshman year, I had nothing on my resume. I was like, how am I going to get hired? But by reaching out to so many people on LinkedIn, to family, friends, anything I could get my hands on, that was really the first step to gaining something on my resume and then just skyrocketing from there. So I'm a big person of reaching out to people, having conversations. You never know where they'll lead. And they ended me here. So
amazing. And you've lived so many lives already. It's really, even just listening to you, it's fascinating. I think it takes a lot of courage to pick up and live out of two suitcases, as you said before, and then constantly be on the move, on the grind, having to learn those cultural nuances. What would you hope that more students understand about building a career before they're starting or before they're ready?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it's never too early to start would be the biggest advice I have. Start freshman year. Start even before. Anytime. I think my first 2 years, what I'm so glad I did is I learned from people. I reached out for so many coffee chats until I knew the industry, as much as I could from just those conversations. I think that is so valuable. It is never too early to start, whether it's your own business, whether it's, even a mentorship program, an online course that you want to do for fun. There's so many opportunities. You just have to grab onto them and go. And I think that will get people very far in their early careers.
And Katerina, thank you so much for joining today. And where can people reach out to you and find you if they want to learn more or connect for a coffee chat?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me on LinkedIn. It's just at Katerina Fulkin, and I'm happy to answer any questions there.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Katerina, for joining. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.